The Young and the Restless Spoilers. For months, Claire Grace had walked the tightrope of redemption in Genoa City. She had smiled when necessary, bowed her head in humility, and played the role of the reformed woman, a soul wronged, manipulated by Jordan, desperate for forgiveness. And the town, wearied by so many betrayals, cautiously began to let her in. Victoria gave her work. Nikki allowed her proximity. Even Sharon, the ultimate empath, showed her grace. But beneath the surface, there remained a current of unspoken doubt. The truth was no one really knew who Claire was. Not truly. Her past was a tapestry of half-truths and missing years, stitched together by carefully chosen words that fell apart under closer scrutiny. Her version of history was plausible, even sympathetic, but something about it never rang completely true. And yet no one dared question it. Until now. Because someone was asking questions. And not just anyone, Jill Abbott. Jill had always been many things. Shrewd, calculating, strategic, and at times ruthless. But what truly set her apart was her instinct. She could see through performance, pierce the veil of superficial charm, and discern the true nature of those who tried too hard to hide. And the moment she laid eyes on Claire Grace, she saw something. Not something sinister, but something layered. Complex. Incomplete. Jill hadn't returned to Genoa City with the intention of investigating anyone. She had been planning a temporary stay in Nice, seeking solace from corporate chaos, wanting to spend time reconnecting with old contacts and perhaps reevaluate her legacy. But fate, as always, had other plans. From the first time she observed Claire interacting with those around her, particularly with Jack Abbott, she knew something didn't align. There was a flicker in Jack's eyes, a subtle but unmistakable instinctive softness, a pull toward Claire that even he didn't fully comprehend. And Claire responded in kind. They shared no obvious history, yet their dynamic had an undercurrent of something unspoken. Jill didn't miss the way Claire lingered in Jack's presence, how her walls subtly lowered when he entered a room. Jill didn't need a dossier or a paternity test to know when blood recognized blood. She had seen it before, in herself, in Billy, in Philip, and the pattern was never wrong. But what shook Jill to her core wasn't merely her suspicion. It was what she uncovered. During a quiet evening at a private estate in Nice, Jill had a chance encounter with a retired genealogist who had once worked on private family records connected to the Abbott lineage. In a conversation over wine and whispered curiosity, Jill delicately mentioned Claire's name. What she didn't expect was for the woman to stiffen, her eyes darkening with recognition. She excused herself, returned moments later with a worn notebook, and handed Jill a folded page, a record never filed, never archived. The name on it was unmistakable, Claire Grace, birth name unknown, linked by blood to Jackson Abbott. Mother, classified. Custody transferred post-birth under sealed order. It wasn't definitive, but it was enough. Enough to reopen doors that had long been bolted shut. Enough to make Jill's blood run cold. The implications were staggering. If Claire was Jack's daughter, it meant someone had orchestrated a decades-long cover-up. That someone had stolen Jack's child from him and hidden her so deeply that not even he, after a lifetime of heartache, had sensed it. And what's worse, that child had been raised, molded, and broken by Jordan, a woman with a vendetta so poisonous it threatened to consume the entire Newman family. The Claire they knew, the damaged but sweet young woman seeking redemption, was not merely a victim. She was a product of Jordan's design. The mirror image of her creator, built with Jack's DNA but shaped by cruelty and control. A weapon in disguise. Jill returned to Genoa City with fire in her eyes. She didn't announce her findings. Not yet. She watched. She waited. She studied Claire like a hawk, observing the cracks, the moments when her composure faltered, when Jordan's influence seeped through the surface. And they were there. Moments when Claire would stiffen under pressure, when her answers came a beat too late, when a name triggered a shadow across her face. Jill knew those signs well. They were the tales of someone carrying too many secrets. And Jill was determined to unearth them all. Meanwhile, Claire felt the shift in the air. She had grown accustomed to distrust, but this was different. Jill's gaze wasn't one of judgment, it was one of knowledge. Of quiet suspicion backed by evidence. Claire sensed that something was coming. She started to withdraw, skipping social events, leaving work early, avoiding Jack. And Jack, ever the romantic optimist, thought she was merely struggling with trauma. He offered support, not questions. But Jill saw the truth. Claire was hiding not just from her past, but from herself. Then came the moment that shattered the silence. Jill confronted Jack in private, presenting him with the document, her observations, and her theory. At first, he laughed, a nervous, dismissive sound. The idea was ludicrous. He would remember if he had fathered a child. He would know. But then Jill reminded him of the years when his life was a spiral of loss, when he made choices under duress, when affairs blurred into forgotten names and moments lost to time. And she pointed out the timeline, the city, the circumstance. It fit uncomfortably well. Jack fell silent, the color draining from his face. The possibility began to consume him. And suddenly, every unexplained emotion, every strange connection to Claire, made sense. Jack demanded a test. Quietly. Discreetly. Claire agreed, but she knew the result before it came. The truth struck like a thunderbolt. Claire was Jack Abbott's daughter. The revelation detonated through the Abbott family like a bomb. Ashley was stunned, Tracy heartbroken, Billy confused and wary. For Jack, it was a tidal wave of guilt, regret, and longing. He had always wanted more children. He had mourned the loss of chemo, struggled to stay connected to Kyle, and now, here was Claire. Flesh of his flesh. But she had been raised in darkness, twisted by the very enemy who had once threatened the Newmans. Could she be saved? Was there still time? Jill, though vindicated, felt no satisfaction. Her discovery had opened wounds no one was ready to face. And worst of all, she knew they had only scratched the surface. Because if Claire's identity had been hidden for this long, what else was still being hidden? And more importantly, who had stolen Jack's daughter, and why? Brilliant continuation. Now, I will extend this The Young and the Restless storyline into an even deeper psychological and scandalous nightmare, weaving in Kyle and Claire's shocking romance, the possibility of Victoria as her mother, and the looming DNA test that could either expose the truth or shatter lives. The tone will remain dark, emotional, dramatic, and suspenseful, written in a long, immersive style, and continue from where we left off. Here's the next chapter of the story, now erupting into total chaos for Genoa City. What began as whispers of a hidden past had now spiraled into a full-blown crisis that threatened to fracture the very foundation of Genoa City's most powerful families. Just as Jack Abbott was coming to terms with the possibility that Claire Grace might be his daughter, a revelation already too explosive to contain, a far more disturbing truth began to surface. A truth so appalling, so emotionally tangled, that it risked unraveling not just a family, but the entire community. Because now, Claire wasn't just some troubled young woman seeking redemption, she was on the verge of marrying Kyle Abbott. Jack's son. Her potential half-brother. The moment Jill Abbott caught wind of the growing flirtation between Kyle and Claire, she nearly collapsed under the weight of it. At first, she thought it was a cruel misunderstanding. Kyle, fresh off his tumultuous split from Summer, had been searching for stability, someone to make him feel alive again. And Claire, craving connection, seemed drawn to Kyle's warmth, his quiet strength, his belief in second chances. Their chemistry was undeniable, and for a while, it had seemed like a blessing. Two broken souls, finding light in each other. But now, with the bombshell that Claire might be Jack's daughter, everything changed. This wasn't romance. This was a ticking time bomb. Jill immediately took her concerns to Jack, her voice trembling not with uncertainty, but fury. If Claire and Kyle went through with this, If they took their relationship to the next level, without knowing the truth, without clarity, the scandal would be irreversible. It wasn't just about family embarrassment or media headlines. It was about moral implosion, the kind that could taint the Abbott name forever. Jack was horrified. His hands shook as he flipped through old photos, remembering moments when he had encouraged their friendship, their closeness, their trust in each other. And now, it all felt incestuous. But the situation was made infinitely more complex by the other gaping mystery. Was Victoria Newman actually Claire's mother? Claire had claimed, more than once, that she was born into darkness, molded by Jordan, and stripped of a normal upbringing. Jordan had allegedly faked Claire's death as a baby, raising her in secret and warping her mind. If that story held any truth, and if Jordan had truly stolen her from the Newmans, then Victoria might very well be Claire's biological mother. But if that were the case, and Jack was her father, then the scandal would engulf both dynasties. Newman and Abbott bloodlines tangled in a secret child born of a past affair, hidden for decades, now unknowingly poised to marry her own brother. The implications were monstrous. For a woman like Nikki Newman, already emotionally stretched by decades of family trauma, this revelation could be catastrophic. For Victor Newman, it would be the ultimate betrayal, to discover that his daughter had once carried the child of his business rival. For Victoria, it would mean facing the darkest chapter of her life, the time when she had been manipulated, vulnerable, and perhaps even unaware of the life growing inside her. Claire, of course, remained in the center of the storm, unaware of the full scale of the chaos building around her. To her, Kyle was a sanctuary. A man who didn't judge her by her past, who saw her not as Jordan's project or society's outcast, but as a woman rebuilding herself from the ground up. Their relationship had bloomed quietly, away from gossip and scrutiny. They had begun speaking of the future, dreams of a new life, perhaps even marriage. Claire had allowed herself to imagine what it would be like to have a family that wasn't forged in lies and pain. But reality was closing in. Jack, stricken by dread, knew what had to be done. A DNA test. Immediate, conclusive, silent. He couldn't afford speculation. Jill's warnings echoed in his head. She never made bold claims without evidence. And if she had been right once, she might be right again. Jack went behind the scenes, using private labs, protecting the process from prying eyes. Claire agreed to submit a sample, though she suspected something was off in his demeanor. She had never seen Jack this distant, this haunted. And Kyle? He was the last to know. He still held Claire's hand with the tenderness of a man in love. He didn't realize that he might be loving his own sister. As the days passed, the waiting became unbearable. Claire began to question everything, her past, her memories, the vague nightmares of her childhood that Jordan had dismissed as trauma-induced hallucinations. Could it be true? Had she been born into the very families now swirling around her like a vortex of secrets? Was she a Newman? An Abbott? Or both? And what of Victoria? Jill, ever the strategist, began her own quiet inquiry into the Newman archives. She reviewed timelines, travel records, hospital logs. She reached out to old contacts, nurses, and adoption intermediaries who owed her favors. The puzzle began to form. There was a gap, an unexplained void during one of Victoria's darkest periods, shortly after a nervous breakdown and brief institutionalization. A time when she was said to have left town to heal. What if that was the time Claire was born? What if, in her most fragile state, Victoria had fallen prey to someone like Jordan, who had manipulated the system and stolen her child right from under her? Then the results arrived. Jack held the envelope like it was made of fire. He sat alone in his study, the weight of history pressing on his chest. He opened it with trembling hands, and as he read the result, positive paternity, his breath stopped. Claire Grace was his biological daughter. The past had come screaming into the present. Everything changed. But there was no time to process. Because Kyle and Claire were already making plans for a romantic weekend away. The engagement ring he had purchased was tucked in his pocket. He was planning to propose. Jack had to stop it. But how could he? How do you destroy your son's happiness with a truth that will devastate him, possibly beyond repair? How do you tell him that the woman he loves is the sister he never knew he had? The episode ends with Jack bursting into society just as Kyle drops to one knee, Claire in tears of joy, and Jack shouting, "Stop." The room freezes. Hearts pound. Claire looks confused. Kyle stares at his father, stunned. And Jack, pale and broken, can only whisper two words. "She's family." And then the silence that follows isn't just shock. It's the sound of Genoa City cracking open at its core. Would you like me to continue this next chapter? We could explore Claire's psychological breakdown, Kyle's devastation, Jack confronting Victoria, or even a new twist involving Jordan's final secret. Let me know.